real estate world is completely different. We're way up at the top of the range as a multiple of family income. We've just beaten the so-called housing bubble of '06. But we're pikers compared to Canada, Australia, and Europe and China. They all went to multiples of family income that were, by historical standards, preposterous. And housing, of course, is a more dangerous thing to mess with in economics. And I believe the housing markets around the world will spend the next big chunk of time unraveling and causing all manner of perhaps unexpected problems. And of course, the interest rate bond market overvaluation was universal too. So we had, of the three bubbles, bonds was everywhere, and real estate almost everywhere. And the stock market, curiously, confined principally to the US.
Why does there seem to be such a major current productivity crisis in the UK, maybe stretching back 20 years? There's a lot of science in South England, a lot of talent in the country, a democratic government. What's the fundamental thing going wrong there?
Brexit was one of the worst self-inflicted wounds in modern times that any economy could pull, so that anyone who's building, any Toyota building a plant in Europe who might have built it in Scotland or the north of England will, of course, now be paid in a way to build it in Europe. And that isn't immediate. Some of it is pretty quick, but it goes on and on for decades. That has just lowered the growth rate of the UK. And then, of course, a lot of industrious Europeans who were settling happily in England and the UK, because of the combination of Brexit and COVID, went home and stayed home. And that's taken a lot of blood out of the system. And they were some of the most industrious people that were there. And yes, they try very hard in terms of venture capital to gear up. And they will have, by the look of it, some success. But it's a bit like the tail trying to wag the dog. Much better than nothing. But the truthful answer is, I don't know why they're quite so bad.
What do you view as the fundamental mistake of post-war British history? How did things get so screwed up?
It was really bad luck, because if you had taken a poll on, and they did, when you took a poll in England, do you approve of immigration? And you did it in 1947, 90% of the people disapproved. If you did it in 1957, it was 82. And gradually, people became accustomed to the idea of immigration, and it worked down into the 60s, and finally to about 55%. And they decided to have Brexit, which became a vote on immigration. And they could never have picked a point with as favorable a vote on immigration. Indeed, the whole of London is pro-immigration and pro-Remain. But had they waited another 20 years, it would have been down to 42%, and Brexit would have failed. So any time after World War II, you had a Brexit vote equivalent on immigration, it would have failed in England.
Was Margaret Thatcher a successful prime minister?
She was amazingly successful, because England was in one of its several periods of economic malaise and social malaise in a way. We were really stuck in the class system, one of the reasons I left England. And Thatcher did an unbelievable job on that. She would grab Americans from Brits who'd been 30 years in America at McKinsey and stick them to run the steel company. And she picked people entirely on merit. It was a kind of shocking introduction of meritocracy into the old establishment based on class and land and so on. And at the end of her era, it was a different Britain, much more competitive. London felt like New York, and things happened a lot faster and better.
So when the relatively extreme optimism of the 1980s came along, were you already a skeptic at that point, or that popped up a bit later?
I'm a great optimist, I suspect, along with you, about technology. I think whatever success we're going to have will be on new technology. And I am a great fan of American venture capital. It is, I think, the last best American exceptionalism. We're not very exceptional at many things. We're exceptionally bad at plenty of things in America. But VC, we have the best and the biggest, always have, and will for a considerable amount of time. It's very vigorous, and it attracts the very best foreigners too. They are shockingly encouragingly large fraction of the VC leadership, as you see. And we also have a lion's share of the great research universities that go hand in hand with VC. And if we save our bacon, that is the sector that will do the heavy lifting for everybody, including the US. So I am optimistic, incidentally, that we will have a plentiful supply of green energy and that we will green the entire system. My worry has always been, and still is, timing. We don't have a lot of time to spare. The damage we do is already pretty obvious and it's getting worse rapidly. And there are many flashpoints that the serious climate scientists will tell you about. We could pass them any time where the temperature in the far north releases methane and CO2 from tundra and from offshore frozen methane, clathrates they call them. And that could spiral the temperature out of control. The jet stream could shift. The equivalent ocean currents could shift. There are several of these potential self-reinforcing cycles that, and of course the classic one is you melt the ice reflected the sun, and now the dark ocean absorbs it, and the temperature goes up faster and more ice melts, etc. So we are really playing with fire, and we just don't know how long we've got, how high the temperature can go without triggering these points. You cannot find a serious climate scientist who would give you a guarantee that that will not happen. Some of them think it's very likely, some of them think it's unlikely, but all of them agree it can happen when you play with another degree or two centigrade.
Who or what else would you describe as your major intellectual influences?
I was a great fan of Jack Bogle's, hardworking, driven, honest man wanting to do the right thing by investors.
Why has Boston been so central and so big in asset management? Is that accident, or you think there's a good reason?
It has a good cluster of universities. With any luck, that should be associated with producing people who think. And if you think, pretty soon you're likely to come up with good ideas, and then you need to implement them. Good engineering, MIT, and so on. No, Boston has been blessed with an unfair advantage for a long time, the highest incidence of any major city of students.
Can the global mining industry produce sufficient raw materials for the green transition?
Not as currently configured, no, not a prayer, not even close.
Which is the most binding constraint?
Lithium today, I would say. If we mined every ounce of lithium that are in the known reserves, it would probably be about 5% of what is required to green the entire economy once, forgetting about the fact that every 30 years it would then need to be replaced.